A swollen corpse, leaking black fluid. The stench made courtiers faint, and then stray dogs broke in and licked the trail of rot. This wasn't an ordinary prisoner. This was King Henry VIII, who was once the most feared man in Europe. But his final days were unseen, unspoken, and far worse than anyone imagined, because the coffin didn't just leak, it exploded. The king who couldn't die. In the winter of 1547, England was ruled by a man whose name still echoes through history, King Henry VIII. To some, he was a Renaissance monarch who was cultured, commanding, and chosen by God. To others, he was a monster in a crown, drunk on blood, obsessed with legacy, and feared even by his own family. He wasn't born to be king, his older brother was. But when Arthur died young, the crown passed to Henry, and everything changed. He inherited a kingdom and reimagined its soul. When the Catholic Church denied him an annulment, he didn't plead. He ripped the country away from Rome and built his own church instead with himself at the top. He rewrote laws, burned heretics, turned bishops into spies, and when his wives disappointed him, they vanished, divorced, executed, or left to rot in forgotten castles. But power never satisfied Henry. He wanted more control, more heirs, more praise. He demanded loyalty the way a butcher demands silence from the animals in his pen. Cold, complete, unquestioning. Those who whispered against him didn't last long. They were tortured, stretched, boiled, and beheaded. Yet despite the horror, the paintings tell a different story. He was dressed in gold, legs wide, hands firm on his dagger, a mountain of a man with eyes like burning coals. He looks immortal. He looks like he could crush anyone who dared defy him. But behind the paintings and pageantry, Henry was already rotting. His waist ballooned past 50 inches. His face swelled. His leg ulcer returned, and it was not just infected, but deep, wet, and impossible to ignore. It leaked. It smelled. It never healed. And yet, no one said a word, because Henry wasn't just a king. He was a storm that killed everything in its path. His rage came in waves, often unprovoked. A glance, a cough, a rumor, and that was enough to vanish from the world. So they obeyed. They worshipped. They lied. They told him he looked well. They told him his kingdom adored him. They told him he would live forever. Because the truth that the king was dying from the inside out was the most dangerous sentence a man could speak, and Henry, he was listening. Before we move on, we want to thank you for listening. We really like making these videos and would highly appreciate it if you subscribe to our channel. Thank you. Let's move on. The body that betrayed the crown. The transformation wasn't sudden. It was slow, and it was humiliating. By his late 40s, Henry VIII could barely walk. Servants had to carry him up staircases in a custom-built chair. His legs that were once armored and admired had now turned against him. The left leg was the worst. Inside it, a wound festered. It never closed. Surgeons tried everything from leeches, poultices, and even slicing it open with red-hot irons, but it refused to heal. The smell was unbearable. Court records never say the word gangrene, but the descriptions speak louder than any diagnosis. The leg oozed pus. It dripped blood and other fluids that stained the marble floors of Whitehall. Even his courtiers, that were trained to bow, to flatter, and to pretend, struggled to stay in the room. Some vomited in secret. Others fainted. But no one dared speak the truth aloud. He grew heavier by the year. Estimates put him at over 390 pounds in his final months. The royal tailors couldn't keep up. His armor split. His bed creaked. The once magnificent figure was now buried in layers of fat and silk. His moods shifted like storms. One moment silent and still. The next, he was screaming, accusing, sobbing. He accused his servants of betrayal, swore his doctors were poisoning him, and screamed at portraits that didn't move fast enough to please him. He tried to mask the decay, sprayed perfumes across his chambers, demanded flowers at all times, ordered the windows opened wide, even in winter. But it didn't work, because the smell wasn't around him. It was coming from him. And every morning, he woke up weaker. The wound on his leg bled more. His urine darkened. His mind slipped further. But his appetite never faded. He gorged on meat and wine, like a man trying to fill the emptiness with excess. But nothing filled it. Nothing slowed the rot. The same body that crushed rebellions, seduced queens, and reshaped history was now falling apart from the inside, and King Henry could feel every inch of it. The chamber of rot. By now, Henry didn't live in a palace. He lived in a tomb that still breathed. Inside his private chambers at Whitehall, the air was thick with the smell of slow death. Velvet curtains soaked in rosewater couldn't mask it. Fresh flowers wilted within hours. The source was always the same. The king's leg. It wasn't just a wound anymore. It was a crater crawling with infection. Surgeons drained it daily, slicing into it as Henry bit down on cloth to muffle his screams. Sometimes they found maggots. The records call them natural cleansers. No one dared call it what it was: rot. The bed had to be stripped constantly. Soaked bandages, bloodied sheets, spoiled linens, all tossed out and burned. Even his dogs refused to sleep near him. Only the most loyal servants entered the room, and even they couldn't hide their horror. Some stuffed herbs up their noses. Others vomited in corners. A few simply fainted and were replaced. The king noticed. He asked why people stood so far from him, why no one held his gaze, why the physicians shook as they spoke. No one answered. They knew what he wanted to hear. He didn't want the truth, only obedience. So they lied. They said he was healing, that the swelling was improving, that the smell wasn't from him, but from the halls. He ordered the mirrors removed. He couldn't stand the reflection. He couldn't bear to see the bloated face, the cracked lips, the sores behind his ears. The great Henry VIII, who once broke Rome itself, now flinched at his own image. He began to talk to himself, whispered apologies, swore vengeance, screamed names that hadn't been spoken in years. Wives, daughters, ghosts. One night, he screamed so loud the guards broke in. They found him drenched in sweat, clawing at his leg, blood smeared across the sheets. He claimed the devil was inside the wound, that it whispered to him. By this point, he rarely left the bed. It wasn't a throne. It was a deathbed soaked in silk, guarded not by knights, but by servants too terrified to breathe. And still, the king lived. Some said God was punishing him slowly. Others said the devil wasn't done watching. But all agreed on one thing. This was no longer a man. This was rot wearing a crown. The monster and the mirror. By his final year, Henry VIII no longer ruled with a sword. He ruled with fear. Not the fear of battle or exile, but the fear of what he might do next. His mind was unraveling. He forgot names, then faces, then entire years. He accused his closest allies of treason, swore his food was poisoned, and demanded the arrest of men who had been dead for decades. Every glance was a threat. Every silence was a trap. One slip of the tongue, and a servant could vanish before morning. The palace whispered about it behind closed doors. The king was haunted by the people he had destroyed. At night, they said, he spoke to his dead wives. He cried out for Anne Boleyn, the woman he sent to the block. He cursed Catherine Howard, who screamed before the axe fell. He begged for Jane Seymour, the only one who gave him a son, and the only one who died before he could turn on her too. He swore someone was watching, that something waited in the shadows of the drapes. He once ordered a tapestry torn down because it blinked. Physicians were helpless. They bled him, burned him, fed him crushed pearls and powdered emeralds. Nothing worked. The ulcers worsened. The leg blackened. His mind slipped further. He had stopped being a king. Now he was a thing, a shriveling beast in silk robes, guarded day and night. And always, always, he returned to the same question. Why do they fear me? The answer was never spoken. Tudor terror, the final weeks. By early January 1547, Henry VIII was no longer ruling. He was dying. He hadn't walked in months. His leg ulcer had grown so large, it reached the bone. It oozed continuously. Doctors called it a foul discharge. The smell filled every hall. Towels soaked in vinegar lined the floors, but nothing stopped the stench. He was now bloated, near 400 pounds. His liver was failing. His face, once round and flushed, turned waxy and yellow. Urine came out black. He barely spoke. When he did, it was nonsense. Lists of long-dead traitors. Battles that had already been fought. His doctors were powerless. Bleeding didn't work. Poultices made things worse. His body rejected everything, but none dared say the truth. The king was dying. Saying that too soon meant death. Henry had ordered his passing be kept secret until a smooth transfer of power was guaranteed. A premature announcement could lead to civil war. So they lied. To the public, His Majesty is resting. To the court, he is in recovery. But inside the royal chamber, everyone knew. No heirs were at his side. His 9-year-old son, Edward, remained at a safe distance. Mary and Elizabeth stayed away. Catherine Parr visited, but could not bear the smell or the sight. By January 27th, he stopped speaking. His breathing became ragged, strained, wet. Black blood leaked from his leg and nose. At dawn on January the 28th, the king's pulse vanished. He was gone, but no bells rang. There was no public mourning. The court waited. 3 days of silence. 3 days where Henry VIII was dead, but not officially. They filled the chamber with herbs, and they sealed the room. They prayed the body would hold together. It didn't. His corpse began to swell. The gases from inside were trapped and building pressure. Servants reported strange sounds from the coffin. One said the lid rose slightly. Still, there was no announcement, because the next step wasn't a funeral, it was containment. The king, the man who tore down Rome, executed queens and ruled with fire, had died in secret, and soon his corpse would force its way back into the light, leaking, swelling, ready to explode. The coffin that couldn't hold him. They built the coffin fast, too fast. It was made of lead and oak, sealed tight, wrapped in cloth soaked with pitch, not out of honor but out of fear. The rot inside Henry VIII's body wasn't slowing, it was accelerating. The corpse had swelled grotesquely, his abdomen distended. His face was unrecognizable. Fluids leaked from his mouth and leg even after death. The stench made seasoned guards gag. The chamber had to be closed off permanently. 4 days after his death, they moved the body in secret. The journey to Windsor began under cover of night. The funeral procession was grand, but distant. Nobles kept their distance. Priests read Latin prayers louder than usual to drown out the sound of sloshing inside the coffin, because the king was decomposing. The trip to St. George's Chapel took 2 days. They stopped at Sion Abbey to rest. That night, something went wrong. Very wrong. Witnesses reported a loud crack from inside the coffin. Pressure had built up. The corpse had ruptured. Black, foul-smelling liquid spilled onto the stone floor beneath the coffin. The dogs smelled it first. Stray hounds, drawn by the scent, licked at the floor beneath the royal corpse. None of the priests stopped them. No one moved. This wasn't just a scandal. It was blasphemy. A man who declared himself head of the Church of England was leaking, bursting, desecrated by dogs. An old prophecy surfaced. John of Gaunt's friars had once said that a king who destroyed the church would die like a beast and be eaten by dogs. Now, it seemed real. The next morning, they cleaned the mess in silence. The coffin continued its journey. At Windsor, they buried him in St. George's Chapel, in the same vault as Jane Seymour, the wife who had died bearing his son. There was no grand tomb, no statue, no final display of power, just a body that had fought death for too long and lost in the most abominable way imaginable. A king who wanted control over everything, even death. But in the end, Henry VIII couldn't even control his own corpse. The legacy drenched in blood. Henry VIII ruled for 38 years, but his death cast a longer shadow than his reign. His will left power in the hands of a council, but no one trusted anyone. Factions turned on each other within weeks. Arrests began before the king's body was cold. Men he once called loyal were dragged to the Tower. The boy king, Edward VI, was crowned at just 9 years old, a puppet with a crown, surrounded by predators. Henry's break from Rome, the act that defined his reign, triggered decades of religious chaos. His son made England Protestant. His daughter Mary turned it violently Catholic. Elizabeth tried to hold the center. The churches he gutted were never rebuilt. The monks he evicted died in poverty. The nobles who gained land from his plunder became rich, then paranoid. His 6 wives were remembered more than his wars. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. Of the women he married, 2 were executed on his orders. 2 died. 1 outlived him, barely. Only Jane Seymour gave him a son, and she died doing it. Her reward was sharing a coffin with the man whose corpse exploded above her bones. He had once dreamed of a dynasty, but by the time he died, the Tudor line was already crumbling. His son died at 15. Mary died childless. Elizabeth never married, and the Tudor line died with her. What survived? Ruins, blood, a country divided by faith, a monarchy twisted by fear. He had ruled with absolute power, but absolute power left him isolated, paranoid, and grotesquely alone. Not a father, not a husband, not even a man by the end, just a decaying symbol of unchecked control. And yet his name endured, but not because of greatness, but because of the horror. A king who changed the course of history, but couldn't stop the dogs from licking his blood. Outro. There are kings remembered for glory, and there are kings remembered for terror. Henry VIII is remembered because of how it ended. Not with fanfare, not with final words carved into stone, but with silence, infection, and a coffin that couldn't hold him. His empire bent under his will. His people knelt. His enemies bled. But in the end, his own body turned on him. This was not divine punishment. It was a human consequence. The betrayal of wives, the torture of friends, the rewriting of God's word, all of it in exchange for control. But no man controls death, not even a king who made himself head of the church. Henry VIII died swollen, alone, and oozing, sealed in lead, prayed over by men who feared his ghost more than they loved his memory. The final horror wasn't the dogs licking his blood. It wasn't the rupture of flesh. It wasn't the legacy of daughters who feared him, or a son who never truly ruled. The final horror was this: a man who believed he was chosen by God was ultimately claimed by death. And as his bones dissolved beneath the stone of Windsor, England turned the page, but it never forgot the smell. If you came this far, make sure to click the next video that's on the screen right now. Subscribe to stay engaged for more content.